Welcome to Novara Live. Coming up tonight, Trump's plundering presidency has reached giddy new heights. Nigel Farage, of course, is following hot on his coattails. We also take a look at the first of Burnham's loose policy declarations or some policy debates surrounding him. And finally, can we have too much freedom? And do we need a digital Sabbath? Very interesting questions. I'm Michael Walker. I'm joined tonight by Banseka Kayembe, who you had an interesting evening on Wednesday.
I did.
England versus Democratic Republic of Congo. Tell me why that was particularly interesting to you.
Yeah, my dad is from there. So this is the first time in a very long time that Congo played at the World Cup. And I didn't know how I was going to feel. Not very used to, not supporting England. So I wasn't sure how it was going to run. But I went to a pub in Brixton. We're amongst the Congolese diaspora and immediately supported Congo.
Yeah. So you were disappointed when those two goals went in?
Yeah, I was. I was. It's very context dependent, though, I think, these things, aren't they?
I like that fluidity.
My identity is fluid, Michael.
Yeah. Fabulous. If you'd like to support our work, you can sign up at novaramedia.com/support. As regular viewers will know, we have been struggling slightly in the heat waves. We are moving soon, though, to a studio with air conditioning, which means we can work all year round. The computer won't buckle under the pressure, and we won't have to try and think in 34-degree heat. If you want to help smooth that process, if you want to help us move into a new studio in style, do please consider becoming a supporter. You can do that at novaramedia.com/support. Lots of you have joined recently, so thank you so much if you are a new supporter over the last month or so. If you are a long-time supporter, thank you even more. Brilliant. In his first year and a half in office, US President Donald Trump has managed to impose global tariffs that almost crashed the stock market, start a war in Iran that drove up the price of oil, and almost double the US rate of inflation in just a few months. He's also managed to get rich, very rich. Since returning to the White House in January last year, Trump has added around $2.2 billion to his personal fortune. The information comes from Trump's annual financial disclosure report for 2025. At nearly 1,000 pages, it's possibly the longest disclosure document in recent presidential history. Just one example, Joe Biden's was only 11 pages long. That's a big difference. To put those earnings in context, in the year before he became president, Trump's earnings were around a quarter of this year's total at $600 million. So where has all the additional cash come from? Well, the largest windfall by far comes from Trump's cryptocurrency business, which brought him nearly $1.5 billion. That's insane, $1.5 billion from crypto. Now, around $650 million came in as royalties from a company called Celebration Coins. Now, that's the organization thought to be behind the Trump dollar meme coins, launched 3 days before Trump became president in 2025. A further $700 million comes from another crypto business founded by Trump's sons, Donald Jr. and Eric, as well as the children of his trade envoy, Steve Witkoff. A big chunk of that income came through a deal that hit the headlines earlier this year when a firm linked to Emirati royalty bought 49% of the company for $500 million. The Gulf, and the Middle East more widely, has been a region in which Trump has, of course, focused much of his foreign policy since the sale. Trump and his family also profited from licensing the Trump name to developments in other countries crucial to current US foreign policy, including Saudi Arabia and Qatar. Trump has also made a lot of money through share trading, having made over 20,000 share trades in 2025 alone. Now, particularly significant were a series of large trades made around the announcement of Trump's Liberation Day tariffs, which were only disclosed this week. So this graph from the Wall Street Journal shows some of those trades, and with Trump's accounts buying several hundred stocks in the S&P 500 just days after the president announced the stinging global tariffs that sent stock prices plunging. The president's agents bought low, and the stocks then briefly went lower before he paused the tariffs a few days later, which sent the index, as well as the value of Trump shares, soaring. Now, obviously, this vast and sudden fortune has raised eyebrows, and more than eyebrows perhaps, with questions being asked around whether Trump is profiting directly from his presidential decisions. This was his response to those allegations.
To critics who say you're profiting off the presidency, Mr.
Well, you know why I'm profiting? Because the stock market's going up. Everybody's profiting. If you have a 401k, how's your 401k done? It's about up 85%. Thank you, President Trump. So we're all profiting. I'm profiting because I have a lot of money and a lot of cash, and I give it to institutions. I don't know if they know what they're doing or not, but they buy a vast array of things.
Now, plenty of US politicians have found that answer unconvincing, with the Democrats determined to investigate his business dealings when he leaves office. Not MAGA, though. They seem perfectly happy to see their president get ever richer. Kelly Koch, chair of Iowa-based group MAGA Nation, told the New York Times this: "We live in a free country, capitalism. He's extremely smart. He's a businessman. My kids follow Bitcoin, Polymarket, Kalshi, all this new tech stuff. If you don't, you're going to be left behind." Former Republican New York City Council leader Joe Borelli also told the paper this: "Nobody who voted for Donald Trump, a guy with skyscrapers with his name on it, with a plane that has his name on it, is suspect of him making money. He made his whole career talking about how much money he makes." The scale of Trump's earnings have given rise to some unflattering comparisons with global oligarchs and despots. Scott Graytack of Transparency International has warned that while those comparisons may go slightly too far, the signs are not good, telling the Financial Times this: "The US isn't Russia under Putin, it's not Indonesia under Suharto. We still have independent courts, a free press, and a strong civil society. But the pattern is familiar to us: a leader and his family profiting off the presidency, while the government they control are literally designing the rules around how that wealth can be accumulated." Banseka, I feel like all of these things, that if there was a scandal the 10th of this size under any other presidency, they would be impeached. Like the Bitcoin stuff especially. Because it's like, this Republican sort of say, "Oh no, Bitcoin, this is the future." This is literally like a corruption scam. So he creates the Trump coin, which people can buy and he profits from. They don't get anything. But if they told him, "By the way, we bought, $500,000 in your Bitcoin," that is just corruption by the back door, because it's just a campaign contribution, or it's not even for a campaign, it's just for his personal enrichment. Like $2 billion. And it's not from him, it's not from his hotels, right? It's not that more people are going to the hotel. It's literally, he's thought, what can I possibly do to use this office of presidency to get rich? And then done it in the most transparent way possible. Obviously, we sort of quoted that expert saying, this isn't the same level as Russia. And I'm sure legally it's not. Russia, Putin has much more, there isn't so much separation of powers in Russia as there is in the United States, which does constrain Trump more than Putin is constrained. But in terms of the out and out corruption and use of the office to enrich yourself, it's hard to imagine anything sort of more outrageous than this.
I mean, he's like this perfect emblem for sort of late stage capitalism. You're right. He's got all these investments, but he's not making things, he's not providing things anymore. You can make an argument, of course, with hotels. You're providing a service, you're giving people jobs, you're creating wealth of some kind. This isn't doing that. It's kind of one of my main gripes with cryptocurrency and why I feel incredibly kind of skeptical of it in general, to be honest. But I mean, this is absurd. There is just an absurdity to this. It's so bait. It's so kind of surface level. There's no notion of even trying to pretend really, for the most part, it's anything else. Much like the World Cup, I suppose, where it's all been on the surface. The issues and problems with America. They've done some kind of anti-sports washing with the World Cup. This is kind of the same thing. There's no real effort, I think, to hide. This guy is just making money. I don't understand how with the shares trading stuff, how's that not insider trading?
Yeah.
I don't understand. Where are the financial rules that are meant to apply to everyone? Where are they? They don't apply to this guy who makes the rules and can make the rules to suit his own personal business interests. So it's really, really absurd. And, I get the impression that this type of stuff, I think particularly with his base, not so much Democratic voters, it doesn't seem to be having any cut through with the base. There's other stuff that they're annoyed about, obviously the war in Iran and that putting pressure on prices and things like that. This doesn't seem to have any cut through, despite the fact that I think we know that over the past sort of 20 years or so, money in politics has been this big thing in US politics, something that unites actually the left and the right. But this doesn't seem to be having any cut through. And I was thinking about, well, why? I don't know if that's because different groups of people have different ideas about what it means to be bought in politics. And so this framing about Trump being a businessman, well, he's just making smart decisions. He's making business deals that are perfectly legal. Corruption perhaps to Republican voters is much more akin to, people who just get into politics and then get money donated straight into their pocket. But for someone who's investing and making smart investments, that's not bad money in politics, really. So it's very, very interesting that this very bait, I think, story doesn't seem to be having much cut through with his base.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably polarized politics as well, right? Imagine if Fox News was really like haranguing him for this, like maybe that would make a dent. But I suppose now, because everyone has fallen into line on that side of politics with Donald Trump because they're scared of his supporters, their job now is just to say, well, I mean, it does look a bit weird, but I mean, what can you do? It's Donald Trump. And then obviously if you're watching that, you think, oh yeah, maybe what can you do? It's Donald Trump. Someone who is hoping that this rule, or this apparent new rule that you can get away with anything in politics, someone who's hoping that spreads beyond the United States is Nigel Farage. Of course, when it comes to wealth, our politicians in the UK are generally small fry compared to those in the States. We're not talking $2 billion. That doesn't mean, though, they manage to avoid all appearances of benefiting from their positions or avoiding difficult conflicts of interests or getting involved in embarrassing cryptocurrency, things that look like scams. I don't want to get sued, but everything involving cryptocurrency, I think, looks like a scam to me. One British politician in particular can't seem to shake the headlines. Questions have now been raised about Nigel Farage's £4 million property portfolio, one that involves 5 mortgage-free houses, 4 of which he bought with cash since 2020, and only 2 of which have been declared to Parliament. That revelation followed fast on the heels of another involving a £5 million gift from Thailand-based British crypto billionaire Christopher Harborne, which has been described variously as a gift, a reward, and a fund for Farage's security. That was also not declared to Parliament, despite having been received just months before Farage became an MP. Farage has strongly denied any wrongdoing or breaking of parliamentary rules. But the Reform UK leader has now been reported to the Parliamentary Standards Watchdog over claims he lobbied Bank of England Governor Andrew Bailey to scrap plans to create a British cryptocurrency that would have competed with Harborne's. That's alleged to have happened in September last year, months after Farage both received Harborne's cash and became an MP. And yet another branch of Farage's business details have come under scrutiny today. The Reform leader was paid £270,000 in May by a company called Direct Bullion for just 12 hours work as a brand ambassador for its gold coins, leading some to question whether he was doing more than just creating social media videos for the firm. This is from the Financial Times. Since being elected, Farage has declared more than $2 million in outside earnings, including a total of £685,000 from Direct Bullion since December 2024. The latest payment of $270,000 is equivalent to an hourly rate of $22,000, double the rate he received in October 2025. In the past 6 months, only one video posted on the company's social media features Farage speaking to camera. The video posted in late May, entitled "Gold Bars in Your Pension," has received just 67 views and 0 likes. Neither Reform nor Direct Bullion responded to the FT's request for comment. Now, Banseka, what I find, I mean, obviously it's sinister, but it's also entertaining. Like, the business interest of like the new authoritarian populist right is like Bitcoin and gold coins. Like what it's kind of like what you would imagine kind of corruption to look like in like a cartoon. Like it all involves, like if they were, like even if it was like, corrupt deals over F-35s to Saudi Arabia, obviously I massively disapprove, but that feels like big boy corruption. That you're having this meeting, there's arms, sort of like there's big manufacturing going on, it's going to be geopolitically consequential. This is like, it just seems to me like teenage internet scams by the most powerful people in the world. Obviously Farage isn't yet, but he wants to be. Like, is there not just something kind of grotesquely juvenile about all of this?
Yeah, it's a bit silly, isn't it? Like, he might as well just be carrying like sacks of cash with like dollar signs on them.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
I guess, why not? It's interesting. Like he seems really quite dogged by this scandal. Now it's not going away. I think last week when he was trying to back questions away, he did a terrible job. The comms on that was terrible, basically being like, I can buy 1 million Ferraris if I want to, it's my money. I don't think the public really want to hear that, even some of his base, saying nobody cares. I think actually people do care. And it turns out the media seems to care. They seem to have decided actually we do care about this story. Some of his close advisors, people like Tim Montgomery, are saying, look, you can't just hide. you've got to come out and face the music and start answering these questions. And I can't help but feel like he's losing his like razzmatazz as a result. Like when you see him in public now, the brief moments that we do, he doesn't have a kind of jovial or kind of charismatic edge to him as much anymore. He's kind of losing the things that I think people feel attracted to Farage on, which is in part his demeanor and his ability to come across as straight talking, right? I do think maybe Farage is having a harder time on some of this money stuff than Trump is, partly because we're from different ecosystems where, of course, like, corruption in politics money-wise in the US is of a huge scale compared to ours. But with Nigel Farage in particular, like it really does just look like he's been bought. At least with Trump, it's like he's put money in shares and then he's traded those shares and that's got the kind of veneer of this is a business decision that's going really well and I'm just really great at business and deals. Farage is literally just like 5 million poured just straight into my pocket from some billionaire. And it's quite difficult to pretend that that's not corruption of some kind. It's harder to back that off. It's harder to pretend, well, actually, I'm just very good at business. Nigel Farage, he's built his own persona around being this anti-establishment politician, not a business guy who does business dealings like Trump. So I don't think he has that, no pun intended, Trump card to kind of throw on the table to justify or explain these vast sums of money that he appears to be getting.
Also with the Bitcoin stuff, because whenever there's a debate about taxing wealth or sort of corporation tax, someone always brings out the line saying like, well, these companies, supernormal profits, even if it's like oil and gas, that's also your pension funds. When they get rich, you get rich because it's indexed pension funds.
Right.
So they can sort of make this argument that there is some common interest where when these companies grow, your living standards also rise. I think it's in many ways a flawed argument, but at least it's, there is some connection to reality there. The idea that Nigel Farage taking money from a Bitcoin billionaire and then trying to lobby Andrew Bailey to not introduce their own Bitcoin. I mean, I don't really understand that story anyway, but to regulate Bitcoin or not regulate Bitcoin in such a way to benefit Bitcoin, like there is no argument that you can make in a debate and stand up and saying like, what's good for Bitcoin is good for you. But like it's an impossible argument to make because it's completely abstracted. It's completely separate from the real economy. It's like, as I say, like juvenile people gambling on the internet, and it has nothing to do with anyone else.
Yeah, and it feels like it's not a currency really with any value in the real economy, as you've said. It
Especially
doesn't mean
not
anything.
Trump coin. I mean, Bitcoin maybe, but Trump coin, no. Okay, we're agreed on this.
I think so.
No debate here. It's wrong. You shouldn't take billions of dollars from Bitcoin and then lobby on behalf of Bitcoin. Verdict in, wrong. Don't do it. With a new Labour leader entering Downing Street shortly, all eyes are on what, if anything, Andy Burnham can do to strengthen the British economy. And one thing that keeps getting asked is whether he'll cut the welfare bill, which we're repeatedly told is exploding, it's out of control. But is it? Professor of Economics Jonathan Portes made this intervention on Sky News.
Let's do the economics of it first. Where does he have room to try and cut the welfare bill?
Well, I think that's in some ways not the right question. There's a lot of nonsense talked, including, unfortunately, on Sky about the spiraling welfare bill. If you look at the welfare bill as a proportion of national income, how much of the overall economy is devoted to the welfare bill, it's lower than it was 15 years ago, and it's pretty much back what it was under Margaret Thatcher in the 1980s. So this idea that it's out of control is just wrong.
So this is the first question that keeps getting put to every talking head, every economist, every sort of Andy Burnham outrider. Will Andy Burnham, he likes to be liked, so will he be brave enough to cut the spiraling welfare bill? If he's a serious sort of adult, not just someone with good eyelashes, surely he must be willing to punish disabled people, essentially, is what people seem to be arguing. As Jonathan Portes points out there, the welfare bill isn't actually spiraling. It's sort of the same level it's ever been. The Economist and Times columnist Simon French, by no means a lefty, shared this chart supporting Portes. So it shows the percentage of social security spending, excluding pensions, as a proportion of GDP over time. It's averaged 4.8% over the past 50 years. It's currently 4.7%, so below that average. Difficult to see the fiscal emergency in that chart or anything running out of control. There has been a shift in the makeup of that spending, though. So sort of when people say there are a few things that do look worrying here, this is normally what they're talking about. So this chart shows the total welfare bill since 2007, including pensions. As you can see, under austerity, the total fell from 12 to 10%. The drop was for people of working age, and it caused a lot of harm. And as Portes says, the total bill is still way below what it was in 2010 when the Tories came to power. There are, though, two areas that have seen steady growth. So the state pension is one in dark blue, which is by far the largest expense and continues to grow as our population ages. And in red, non-pensioner payments for disability and incapacity have almost doubled in recent years, going from 1.2% of GDP to 2.1% between 2010 and 2025. So should that concern Andy Burnham? Well, the argument goes that if these keep growing, he'll have to raise taxes, which is politically difficult, or he'll have to borrow more. And if he borrows more for pensions and any kind of benefit, that will lead to higher interest rates, which will make it more difficult to borrow for the infrastructure upgrades that Britain desperately needs. And that's why one of his advisors, Andy Haldane, has suggested dropping the pensions triple lock. So the triple lock means pensions rise annually by either 2.5%, which is, or the average wage growth, or inflation. So it's one of those three, whichever is highest. This was Haldane's reasoning in the Financial Times for suggesting dropping that. So he said, the inability of the government to make meaningful cuts to public spending is its fiscal Achilles heel. This vulnerability can only be treated by taking politically costly action to curb public spending materially. Of the options, replacing the triple lock with a single lock to inflation index state pensions, as with all other benefits, is both fiscally prudent and socially equitable. It would yield a high and rising fiscal dividend of perhaps £5 billion. Recycling this into supporting youth employment would boost intergenerational equity. Now, I agree with Andy Haldane there. I think we should uprate pensions by the same we uprate all other benefits. I think the triple lock was originally introduced because pensioners disproportionately were in poverty in this country. That's no longer the case. Yes, pensioner poverty still exists, but we should be, because it's not disproportionately among pensioners, in fact, I think it's now lower among pensioners than many other groups, we should uprate them all by the same amount. The idea that pensions just go ever higher, which would be if you always increase it by whichever is the highest of those three, doesn't seem particularly equitable to me. I'd say, yeah, do it by inflation. Or maybe average incomes, because if you do it by average incomes, then people of all ages have an interest in policies which will boost employment or boost wages, which I think would be good. At the moment, we increasingly have this divided electorate between people who have an interest in economic growth more generally and people who have an interest in asset prices going up. Again, this is not to moralize the argument. This is just to say, I think things work better if every age group has the same incentives, the same interests. Not just about age groups, by the way. It's also about who will inherit a house and who won't. But anyway, as I say, I think that probably makes economic sense. Pensioners, though, are a politically powerful group. Again, not moralizing. It just so happens that there are a lot of pensioners and they go out to vote. All power to them, which means it would be politically difficult to drop the triple lock. Doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, but it will be difficult. And that, I think, is why more attention falls on those on disability and sickness benefits. They're not as politically powerful. Disabled people, of course, already had an awful time under George Osborne. So the idea that they have it easy in Britain and should sacrifice again, that should be a political no-go area. Obviously, the reason we have a stagnant economy is not because of disabled people. However, there is an argument that there are some groups who the current status quo isn't working for, namely the increasing number of young people on PIP and incapacity benefits, especially for mental health. Alan Milburn is a former minister under Blair who's tipped to enter the Burnham government. He recently published an official review on young people out of work and came to this conclusion.
What is shameful, to use your word, is that, as we've uncovered in the course of this review, for every £25 that we spend keeping young people on benefits, we spend only £1 helping them get into work through employment support.
So the taxpayer is spending 25 times as much money
25 quid, 25 times as much, exactly right.
on benefits for young people
Correct.
than helping them get the skills they need to get into work.
Correct. So this is a failure. This is a failure of the welfare system, but it's a failure, I'm sorry, of the school system, the skills system, the health system. What we're doing is we're not prioritising getting young people into a situation where they can be learning or earning, and instead we're transporting them into the world of benefits with incalculable costs for their life chances.
So in that report, he found this. Shockingly, 6 in 10 young people who are NEET, that's not in education, employment or training, today have never had a job, up from 4 in 10 in 2005, at the very point when they should be starting adult life, gaining confidence, building skills, learning the habits of work and taking their first steps towards independence. Too many are becoming detached from education and employment altogether. We are at risk of a lost generation. Administrative data shows that PIP claims are getting longer in duration, with 87% of 16 to 24-year-olds in the 2019 cohort still on the benefit 5 years later, compared to 74% of the 2013 cohort. Only 25% of young people in receipt of PIP at age 24 are in work. The employment prospects of a young person claiming PIP get 21% worse over 6 years, whereas for everyone else, they get 31% better. Banseka, this is going to keep coming up. What is your position on all of this? When Andy Burnham's asked about sort of will he cut benefits, should he just say, no, there's no problem here, you're just giving me Tory talking points? Or should he say, we will make some changes?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I'm totally against making some changes around pensions. What I want to avoid, partly for kind of societal reasons, I think, is that I don't wish for us to do too much of a kind of young people versus old people sort of situation where, you know, the interests of pensioners are diametrically opposed to the interests of younger people, because I think it's more complex than that. So I hope that the debate doesn't get kind of squeezed into something overly simplistic, like, well, we just reverse the triple lock, single lock, and then it'll all be great and we'll have plenty of money to fund young people. I was interested in some of the stuff Andy Burnham said earlier this week about young people. It got kind of hidden in amongst the number 10 presence in Manchester and stuff like that. The media didn't report on it much, but he seems to be positioning himself as someone who wants to offer some kind of a New Deal almost to younger people, right? And more of an active industrial state that can create more jobs, for people. He talked about vocational education, all of that stuff. He talked about welfare reform. He talked about it potentially maybe doing it through investment, you know, investing in services rather than just saying we're going to scrap, you know, welfare and good luck to you, like Kayembe Badnocha maybe seems to be suggesting. If I'm honest, I think there are actually other parts of the state where we could make more savings. I think there's lots of waste in defence, actually. There's been actually a number of scandals. Declassified have done a lot of reporting on this. There's been a number of kind of overspending scandals of, you know, defence contracts being sent out to companies, for example, like Ajax, to build things like armoured vehicles, and they've spent, you know, 5.5 billion, and they are already something like 5-6 years late on delivering that product. And the state has spent a lot of money on that, for example. So I'm not against cuts. I'm not against slimming down the state in some areas. I actually think there are huge, vast areas where we do waste a lot of money procuring, you know, big business to do a shoddy job sometimes. But I do think that we have slashed at the welfare more than enough now.
Yeah, I mean, austerity was awful, and especially for disabled people. I mean, I don't think the argument is crazy to say that if you've got lots of young people with mental health problems who are on PIP, it might not actually be that's not necessarily the best way to deal with this problem. And sort of like, if you focus the state, because Alan Milman was basically saying we spend a lot more money on benefits than we do on getting people into work. And I can see the argument for sort of like changing that. It's a bit like the argument about housing benefit and building council homes.
Yeah.
I'm very much into sort of how the state should focus on being productive and sort of like building stuff and training people, and not just do cash transfers. Yeah. And I do think that sort of maybe the focus of the left has for a very long time been on sort of cash transfers, and actually an argument about how do we build a productive state, which is very much present now. I'm not making an original point here. There's literally like a bunch of reports at the moment called the productive state. But I think that is the right focus for me. Should we move on to devolution? Because Burnham's positive focus so far has been on devolution, both of power and investment out of the southeast and into England's regions. The argument here is that growth has been too focused on the south. It's pretty much undeniable So this graph from the Times shows which regions collect more in tax than they spend. As you can see, with the exception of London and the Southeast, every region is in deficit, spending more than it delivers in tax to the Treasury. Now, that looks like a situation that doesn't really benefit anyone. So London and the Southeast attracts all the investment, so they're sort of the winners in that respect. But then, they can say they bail out the rest of the country with transfers, right? So it's not really good for London. It's not good for the rest of the country because, it'd be better for London if they could keep more of that money. Obviously, it'd be better for the rest of the country if some of the investment would go there, right? So not a good situation. If devolution could solve that, that would be good. Obviously, there are big open questions about whether it will. What is undeniable is this is not normal. So this chart shows the GDP per worker in various European cities in different countries. So the size of the circle represents its population. If you look at the UK at the bottom, London, which is the large yellow circle there, much more economically productive than the next biggest cities, which all lag far behind. Now, that's unusual. So in France or Germany, the gaps between the most productive cities are much smaller. And also you can see that, Britain just has way more unproductive cities than France, which is a shame. Obviously, the people that say what we need to do so that we can be productive like France is just cut taxes and have lower regulations. Well, guess what? Taxes in France are 53% of GDP. And I don't think many people argue it's a low regulation economy. Be more like France, Banseka, is my position.
Is that because you got France in the sweepstakes?
Because I got France. Well, so we're gonna move on from. We'll come back to the serious topic in a moment, but just to fill you in on the conversation we were having before we went live. So in the sweepstakes, I've got France. In the internal Novara media sweepstakes, I've got France and Paraguay actually, but no one's put money in yet. And I always think that in a sweepstake, the money should be collected at the beginning. Because am I now supposed to go on our Slack channel and say, by the way, no, should we all put our money in now? Because everyone knows I've got France going to be really transparent. Or am I supposed to just send a Monzo request to everyone if France win, like requesting £5? Like, I feel like both of those things would make me look like a scumbag. So ultimately, if France win, I'm going to lose £100. Just like, I'm in a really, really tough situation here.
Could have invested that in Bitcoin and all sorts.
Could have invested that in Trump coin or anything.
Damn.
Anyway, we should go back to this thing. What are we talking about? Mid-sized cities. Do you back the devolution agenda?
Yeah, I think it's a necessary agenda, isn't it? And I think that is something which I think is an interesting proposition about a potential Burnham government. I think it's something that a lot of people want to hear. Of course, London and the Southeast do get massively advantaged. There's lots of poverty, of course, in those areas as well. But we know that that's a big issue in this country. I suppose my question really, and again, he's not put himself forward to give more detail about this because he's not really taking many questions from journalists, I think, at the moment, Andy Burnham. The question I suppose I have about devolution is, it's all very well and good devolving more power to those places to be able to make more decisions about how money is spent and making sure money gets to the right places. But within those enclaves, within Manchester or Birmingham or Leeds or these other places outside of the sort of London and Southeast bubble, there's still inequality within those places as well, right? Like Manchester is not there's a variety of different class experiences happening within Manchester. What happens when you give those places power and you give those power holders who are already there more power to make those decisions? Are they just going to replicate a lot of the same disparities that already exist within those cities and within those places? Unfortunately, we've not been Andy Burnham has not been grilled or questioned on that yet. Maybe he doesn't have the detail. In principle, of course, I'm very in favour of devolution. I think it's actually something politically quite necessary. And it's something that I think is playing well against a kind of highly centralised Labour government under Keir Starmer, where I think a lot of people felt very unlistened to. But there's lots of questions about what does it actually mean to do devolution well, where we don't just end up replicating the same disparities that already exist in a lot of these places that have been historically underinvested.
So I suppose the argument against that, obviously there's obviously a value there, but the argument as to why regional inequality matters, even if you keep sort of the same inequality within cities, is that, it seems better to be a person on low income in London than in sort of a declining than in Hull, for example, right? Like that's shown in the educational outcomes. It's shown in like the aspiration and the social mobility. Because if you are in a booming city, especially if you're a private renter and you're not getting housing benefits, it's difficult. But if you're in social housing in a sort of booming city, the growth, the sort of like cultural dynamism you get to experience and benefit from. Schools perform much better in those locations because they can attract teachers. Like the NHS performs better in those places because they can attract doctors. So there is, obviously, ideally, you would have a devolution agenda whereby all of these different cities grow and they also tackle inequality within those cities. But I think there's also an argument that says, regardless of that, it's better to live in a richer city than live in a poorer city, whatever class you are, which I suppose is why people generally move to bigger cities if they can.
Right. So there's an element of that incrementalism there, I suppose. Will that be enough for Burnham?
I mean, it depends. I suppose the other way of looking at it is that in Manchester, they made the decision to say, we want Manchester to boom. And they actually did it in a way which wasn't particularly egalitarian. Yep. They were like, we're going to invite private capital to build loads of big-ass buildings. Then Burnham comes in afterwards and says, okay, let's now spread some of this wealth. But there's an argument, did they need to get the private investors in first for it to work? Yeah. Same as with China, right? I said this on Wednesday in a brilliant interview with Jayati Ghosh, very interesting person, where he said, Deng said, we have to let some people get rich first.
Let some get rich, yeah.
Now, obviously, they were very poor developing countries, so that doesn't necessarily apply here, but there's sort of, just saying, there's sometimes tensions. Freedom. It's a value which pretty much everyone will agree is a good thing, though they might disagree on what it consists in. For a conservative, freedom might mean the ability to get rich without paying too many taxes. And for a socialist, it might mean the freedom to get healthcare regardless of your income. But there's new evidence suggesting freedom isn't always such a good thing. At least that's according to one leading social psychologist.
What generally happened is the Anglo countries all freaked out in the 90s together. Not New Zealand. That's the one place in the Anglo world where kids are still allowed to climb trees. But in the other countries, like, no, too dangerous, can't do anything. Surprisingly, in Northern Europe, where they do let kids out, they never lock them up, they also have the same mental health crisis. And I think the reason is because it's the societies that are freest. Okay, so if you are free, if you can make your own choices, if you're not bound into tradition or family or religion, freedom used to be often associated with good things, good outcomes. But what we see in the data, when you break up the lines by religiosity or by politics, what we see is a much sharper increase for kids from non-religious homes than compared to religious homes, and a bigger increase for kids who are on the left compared to the right. Now, in my book, The Righteous Mind, I show that part of the difference is that conservatives have a more binding sort of lock-in, duty, honor, see your grandmother, pray. I mean, they're just much more constraining. And there are good things and bad things about that. But when the tsunami hit, when social media came to wash kids away, the kids who were locked in tight communities were somewhat protected. Whereas the kids who were freest, and the Anglo and Scandinavians are the freest societies of the major societies in the world, they're the ones who suffered the worst damage.
That was Jonathan Haidt, a very influential social psychologist, speaking to the New Statesman. He's most famous for arguing that social media and smartphones are making young people miserable. But there he was also discussing why kids in some countries seem to be made more miserable by social media and smartphones than others. And he says initially he thought it would harm the kids the most who have the least freedom to go out in the real world. So he talks a lot about how we've coddled our kids too much. Sort of, he says that in especially the Anglophone countries, sort of paranoia about sort of paedophiles meant people stopped letting their kids play outside. And that was an overreaction and it sort of damaged their resilience and sort of their ability to make their own fun. I think he's very strong on those arguments. But he said that actually, when you look at the data, it doesn't seem to be about which kids had the most time to go and play outside. He actually found from his sort of studies that the better predictor of which societies social media would harm the most was how liberal they were. So he said that if you've got kids that aren't sort of tied into strong social norms, they don't have the sort of protection against social media that might sort of protect them from well, not necessarily its toxicity, because it's not just about them seeing bad things, but from it dysregulating their social lives, I suppose. What do you think? Too much freedom?
What is personal freedom without any constraints? What does freedom mean?
Yeah, very good. Very Jordan Peterson coded, Oh,
God, okay. So edit that out, please. There's such a thing as like negative liberty, I think it's called, right? Freedom minus some strong social structures perhaps isn't really that good. I know you said it's not really necessarily about kids being able to go and play outside. I always say this, I do think there is a link between smartphone usage of young people and the stripping of, through austerity, of third spaces and investment in youth clubs and all of these things that I think for this generation of young people, sadly, is really becoming something completely unfamiliar to them as well. I think some sort of old-fashioned liberals, really, when they thought about protecting liberty, when like John Stuart Mill or whoever was kind of thinking about what it means to be a liberal and to protect liberal autonomy, I think they believed that you would attain that you would get good judgment through being liberated. So like your liberty, your freedom as a personal individual would allow you to attain good judgment and a decent sense of the world. And that doesn't seem to maybe hold in the environment that we're in. Maybe it never did, but it doesn't seem to be holding in the environment that we're in now. Young people are facing an online environment where they're being pressured to conform, where they're being exposed to a lot of kind of warped online norms and the fragmentation of other third spaces, other places to congregate in real life. I think even maybe families are just having less conversation, because we're all sat there on our tech. Yeah, so there's less of that just kind of in the moment kind of norms forming. And so in some respects, whilst I'm not a big proponent of the idea smartphones are the root of all evil, I think I'm like less hard on smartphones than you are. Like you love to talk about smartphones and how terrible they are. I do think that there perhaps is something to this argument.
All right, as you've sort of suggested there, we've had this discussion in a way before about are smartphones the root of all evil. So to move this conversation on, I want to talk about a potential kind of dramatic proposal that I like this week, and I want to get your thoughts on it. So it was in an article in Unheard. Now it's by a guy called Michael Kwenko. He's talking about how smartphones have created a society without social third spaces. A third space is somewhere that's neither the home or the workplace, so a bar, a restaurant, chess club, park, whatever you can think of. But he says, from a world of third spaces, smartphones are creating a silent society. It's all quite apocalyptic in tone. Just as Rachel Carson kick-started the modern environmental movement with her haunting prediction of a silent spring, where birdsong ceased due to the mass die-off of birds from the hitherto uncontroversial use of toxic pesticides, so too should the public today be galvanized out of apathy by the image, already a stark reality, of a silent society characterized by social die-off. Now he says, for the silent society is one drained of organic life and human voices, populated by successive shrinking generations of dead-eyed youths who no longer know how, nor even desire, to talk to each other, foster friendships, seek partners, or build families and communities beyond what exists as simulation on screens. It is, above all, silent, quite literally, because the everyday sounds of conversation, laughter, argument, romance, and spontaneity have been snuffed out and surrendered to total digital intermediation. Now, you might think that's a bit apocalyptic and maybe sounds a bit overblown. I mean, in the general article, it is sort of fleshed out with a bit more anecdote. He's talking to students at a university where the bar used to close at 11 and now it closes at 7:30. And he has sort of like, he's interviewed some of them, and he says they say that as soon as there's a moment of silence, they all just start looking at their phone, even if they're sort of around the same table. And they say it's because we're awkward and anxious that, and obviously that is going to undermine the pleasure of being at a bar with people if everyone sort of feels this instant reaction to have to do that. And as I say, one of the reasons I'm passionate about this is because it affects me. Like if I'm just like queuing for the toilet, I sort of find myself scrolling. I try and resist it, but it's affected my mind definitely. But as I say, I don't want to just talk about how phones are bad. This article struck me because he also puts forward a solution that at least I hadn't considered before. So he says this: the idea of a digital Sabbath has been floating around for some time. The old Sabbaths were enforced by society to uphold the biblical command of rest and worship. And even as late as the mid-20th century, blue laws limited business hours and television broadcasts on Sundays. A new digital Sabbath would have to go beyond being a personal wellness quirk and operate at the level of public policy as a state-mandated 2-day-long shutdown of all non-essential attention economy applications. People would still be able to call or text, but feeds would be frozen. He then puts forward a second element of a plan, to escape from a silent society. So he says a second step provides positive alternatives for people to turn to once their social media goes offline. In this scenario, the attention economy would still function 5 days a week, and that activity would, at least for a time, still be lucrative. Big tech would still rake in billions as it does now, but in this case, it would be taxed a certain percentage of its general income in a country, call it the social reparations tax, premised on the idea that the attention economy firms are directly liable for the social catastrophe wrought by the smartphone age. They should be made to pay for the cost of societal repair. This would come in the form of third space coupons funded by the reparations tax, which would be distributed in the mail to ordinary citizens, but especially to the 16 to 34-year-old demographic, and which may be redeemed at any local establishment. In effect, it is a massive wealth transfer from the distraction merchants to the proprietors of displaced third spaces. Now, I love this policy. I love so digital Sabbath. So you can still have all your apps. You can still find all your information. You know, it's not about censorship because 5 days a week you can look up what you want about whatever issue you care about. But there are 2 days where you just cannot look at any of them. And not only you cannot, but no one can. You walk around the world, you know, everyone's looking up for a while. You know, people will spark up conversations at the queue in the bar instead of just looking at their phone. People will flock to these institutions. And to go back to your point about the cost of living, he's saying that this should come alongside a tax on the big tech giants who can still make all their money 5 days a week, which you get in a coupon, which you can go out and go bowling, go to your chess club, although I don't think they're normally very expensive, go to the bar, do whatever, give it to your drug dealer. I mean, it's the drug
Everybody
dealer.
wins.
The drug dealers probably aren't going to be entitled to cash out these third space coupons. But I love this. And also, I'm often thinking about sort of, do we need to bring back religion? I mean, because I don't believe in God, but sort of like I feel like there was a level of community that it definitely has some upsides that we've lost. But I feel like the digital Sabbath, this is going to be I'm going to be an evangelist for this. And I want to know your thoughts, Banseka.
What about people who work 7 days a week? Are hardworking freelancers?
Well, you could do something else on those 2 days. Probably, I don't want to, probably
joking.
everyone's work, even if you are a social commentator, would be better if you had 2 days a week to touch grass.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think it's a really interesting idea. I suppose I'd be very interested in what, sort of hardcore liberals would think about it, or people who really are committed to individual freedom and individual responsibility, curtailing people's access to the internet. Is it my human right to have access to the internet, Michael?
Was it your human right to take heroin on a street corner?
Yeah.
I mean, we restrict people's liberty all the time.
Yeah.
Right. So this would just be, and again, it's like there are people like Tom Harwood, who's like always from GB News, kind of libertarian. He's actually much more interesting than lots of people at GB News, but like a libertarian. He's always banging on about how we don't have extended hours on a Sunday at the supermarket, and so that means that you can't go shopping on a Sunday night. And it's like, who cares? Like, if you go to France, everything shuts at a particular time. Guess what? They're more productive and happy. Like, because yes, actually, it is good to have some constraints in society, especially if what they are geared towards is not, I think there's always a bigger worry, if any, because I'm talking about social, obviously the history of social constraints and sort of like religion as a way to bring about sort of societal coherence has a really horrible history in many ways. Like, I'm a gay guy. I'm glad we don't live in a theocratic state. But if you can find ones that don't affect people, in a way which is too disparate, so this would affect everyone pretty much equally. When people talk about the social media ban for under 18s, the argument I take most seriously is that sort of for queer children, social media can be a lifeline. There is no queer person that needs to use social media 7 days a week instead of 5. Right. So this to me, so much upside, so little downside. Come on, you've just imagined a liberal who's got a problem with it. Do you have a problem with it, or can we unite behind this and take to the streets with a banner saying "Digital Sabbath now"?
Demand digital Sabbath now. No, I like the idea, and I also love the idea of coupons. I don't know what it is, but any sort of social intervention that involves coupons for things, I'm like, that's fun, that's great. I think it makes it more accessible. And of course, my main gripe always with getting people offline is, well, what else? There has to be something else provided, right? We can't just send people into the kind of apocalyptic abyss of, nothing in real life.
Of a walk in the park.
Well, you can do that every day.
Well, not if you're looking at your phone. I feel like we shouldn't make out the alternative to your smartphone is apocalyptic abyss, but anyway.
No, but that's what I mean. But I think this argument, I believe, if I've understood correctly, he's talking about investment in third spaces and, being able to transfer the time that you would have otherwise have spent online and do something in real life. And I think personally that's great. I think it's a really interesting inversion of kind of classic sort of liberal ideas, which is not that you have liberty first and then everything else follows, but you must create the conditions for true freedom and true liberty, right? And that the state and that we collectively have a hand in cultivating people to be able to attain the highest levels of personal freedom that they have.
I love that cultivation. It's about cultivation so that we can flourish. Self-realization. This is bringing me back to my degree in our political theory papers. What is freedom? Is it freedom to, freedom from? Self-flourishing, the ability to be your true self. Love all of this. Anyway, obviously, enforcing a digital Sabbath would require a government confident that they can take bold action, a government willing to show that they are the boss within their own borders, not some American tech firm. But I'm practicing my speech for the first demonstration for the digital Sabbath, if you can tell. However, this government doesn't seem quite up to the job. So news this week has redoubled my doubts as to whether that's how the current government see the world. So this is a tweet from Lisa Nandy, who's literally the culture secretary, the most powerful person when it comes to how we regulate media in the country. She says, I've decided to leave this platform. So she's on X, Elon Musk's X, and my department will too. A platform originally designed for free speech and expression now favors abuse and misinformation over meaningful debate. It isn't healthy for our democracy or our communities, and I don't want to support it. Now, obviously, many people have done a tweet like this about leaving X, and you can sort of say, is it better to be there and fight, or is it better to go away? Because I think, or is it better to go to the echo chamber that is blue sky or whatever like that? I think there are legitimate arguments to have. But the legitimate arguments are when the person who's decided to boycott X is not the literal person who, like, I don't have the power to, I can decide whether to leave X, but I don't have the power to regulate it. Lisa Nandy, literally it is her job to regulate this thing, right? So if she thinks this is this disastrous place full of misinformation and harassment, like maybe do something about it. It's like, it is just this, I suppose, expression of complete defeat and impotence that you can say, look here, Elon Musk, my department's going to leave your platform. And like, is anyone on X to read Lisa Nandy's tweets? Like, no, like, I don't have anything against Lisa Nandy. Like, I'm sure her tweets are really interesting. I don't know. But I really don't think that this is going to be the tipping point whereby people are like, now Lisa Nandy and the whole culture department have gone, I am off. This has crossed the line. The threshold is done. Like, I really feel like there could be a more significant move that the country's literal cultural secretary could do than boycott X.
I mean, it just ends up coming across as quite a sanctimonious kind of statement, really, doesn't it? A kind of huff of like, well, I'm leaving. This is awful. Cool. You don't want to do anything about it, though? That's quite strange, isn't it? It's all very well leaving the platform because it's terrible. And it is. I'm still on X. I don't have any real presence on there, but I do still, as a journalist.
I check it when I'm in queues or on the toilet.
Here we go. Get that digital Sabbath going now. It's all very well saying that X is terrible. It is. Banning young people from social media under 16s because you've recognised that it's bad potentially for them. It's bad for democracy, yes, but the landscape is now really polluted. So it's quite strange to just say, well, the rest of you, adults who are on here and people who've not of their own individual volition decided to leave, you can just kind of cope with this pollution of our democracy. You can just cope as is. I mean, it's entirely strange, to be honest with you. I mean, the government has recently released a green paper recognising a lot of these issues, actually. So the government knows internally, I think, that it needs to do a better job around regulation of social media. I'm quite interested in Andy Burnham's perspective on this. He's not talked specifically about X or social media, but he seems to have less time potentially for US tech, potentially as well. There was that story about him apparently being prepared to shunt Palantir off from the NHS, for example, wanting to talk about British-owned data centres, for example, as well. So that's kind of sovereignty angle there. No detail, of course, on any of this, but it's certainly a different tone to Keir Starmer in the way in which I think he was quite in hoc, really, with a lot of these firms, and evidently some of his ministers as well haven't really done much either. We need a better regulated social media space. I love the idea of taxing them more and diverting some of those funds into other spaces. It'd be great if some of those funds were diverted into public interest media and public interest news. I would say that, of course. But I think that would be a good thing to do, to kind of buoy up other parts of the media as we tax the more toxic aspects of media as well. But ultimately, with these platforms with the likes of Elon Musk, X, we need them to pay for their mess. They are messing up society. They're messing up our democracy. We need them to pay for it, and commit essentially, ironclad to not being a threat to our democracy. That's what needs to happen. But simply just saying in a sanctimonious way, well, I'm leaving X, this place is awful, when you've literally got the power to do something about it, totally tone deaf.
The other thing that was a bit like sad about it was like the next tweet is follow me on Facebook and Instagram. So it's like you go from one US tech, one unaccountable US tech giant, which is like giving everyone a dopamine rush with the scroll function, and go to the other one. Because again, the thing I always want to repeat, right? Obviously, that there is this idea that sort of the problem with X is that Elon Musk has allowed abuse and misinformation, and that is a problem. Like I think, especially, I don't want to say it's not a problem, especially as like I'm a white guy that doesn't tweet that much, so like I don't get much abuse on there. And I think if you're a brown woman who tweets more, you'll probably get a lot more abuse, or various identity categories or whatever. So I don't want to underplay that. But I do worry when the debate is just about abuse, because just as big a problem is just the scroll function, scrolling. That's what's melting everyone's brains.
And also that it's a space where we've had in real life abuse be able to kind of translate, right? The organizing of pogroms every summer. X has been a part of that, for example, and literally the owner himself, involved in spreading that misinformation, and then cultivates actually a very material harm to people in real life. It's not just reading horrible tweets about yourself, which is horrible anyway. It's literally people's homes then being set on fire, people being chased down the street, attacked because they're perceived to be a migrant, they're black or brown, whatever it is.
Yeah, can you think of sort of any other occasion where like a government minister has been like, this platform organized a pogrom, and therefore I'm going to use a different platform? Right, overwhelming support for Monzo request on France, on a France win in the comments. So you do think I should do the Monzo request? This is brilliant. Because it makes you look, it's really unjust to have a sweepstake where everyone said they'll put in a $5.
You need a project manager of the
I need a project
sweepstake
manager to
who
do
would
it.
shake people down like a debt collector before the competition starts.
Say, Michael didn't
That's what you needed.
And they can say, like, Michael didn't want me to ask you, but a deal's a deal. He is owed. It's probably £100 or something. Brilliant.
not won
maybe
yet.
I can convert it into third space coupons. Banseka, thank you so much for joining me tonight.
Thanks for having me, mate.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Come back on Monday for another live stream from 6 p.m. and potentially from our homes. As you discovered last week, we're still not quite set up for these sweltering heat waves. Instead of it being cooler in the studio as it should be in a normal TV studio, it's actually hotter than outside because our streaming equipment turns up the heat by about 4 degrees. So I might be talking to you from my living room on Monday. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Stay cool.